a very neat organization that focused on providing jobs to women in slums in India and also people who had disability.
Yeah.
And then sold clothing, mainly clothing, through a wholesale and retail kind of outfit in Chicago. So I wound up going there, and I think that's where things really seemed to come to life for me. I felt that there was alignment between my personal mission, education, and organization that was really making a difference. And I could do really good work. It was a very small outfit at the time I joined in.
Yeah.
It was literally, one other employee that was doing everything, to run this business. And at the time, I think it grew to, when I was there, about 6 employees, that were there. And they were mainly African-American women, from around there. But I think we were doing really good work in terms of the products, and the business was really good. It's really a unique organization. In the days when, the term social entrepreneurship had not been coined, but it was really a social enterprise. It figured out an interesting way to take items created by fairly low-skilled people in India. Because in India, you have a system of fine artisanship and, even for embroidery and things like that, fabrics. And these were people who were not highly skilled, but we had a really good designer who took their skills and designed it into how the fabrics and the clothing was constructed. And it became unique, one-of-a-kind pieces that were sold in museum stores in America and alternative trade organizations. So for me,
so this was an American designer, an African-American woman who was taking the work from India?
No. The designer was actually somebody in India, in Bombay.
Oh, okay.
So he was actually an architect who changed again from a social mission perspective to work with these organizations that were called alternative trade organizations.
Right.
And so, and his family was from kind of Kutch in Gujarat, where they have a lot of heritage of like the fine kind of craft work. Embroidery and things like that. So he had kind of taken some of those traditions and then embellished them there. And created this line of clothing. But the founder of the company actually was a woman also who had grown up in Bombay.
Right.
And her mother used to run a huge leprosy clinic, something called MSLM in Bombay. And she had wound up in the United States studying and got married over there. And again, wanting to make some kind of difference, initially was bringing stuff over that were made by the women. This was before the designer joined in her suitcase. She was designing stuff herself, selling it in these home sales and getting traction. And I think when I came on, it had finally started to get a little bit more professional. She had turned it into a catalog and was trying to scale it up.
Right.
But I think it was this appreciation that sometimes innovation can take adversity and turn it into an advantage, right? And you can use it actually to create social impact. And you could somehow take the skills of relatively poor people and create a high-end product from them, also in the place of innovation. And I thought it was a very clever organization. I wound up, working there, I think it was about 6 years, and felt like I had maxed out in what I could learn and started to get frustrated with the pace of how things were evolving.
And you did everything there. So you were like this other employee. What was your role there?
Yeah, so my title was assistant director. So there was the executive director who was the founder.
Yeah.
Who really wasn't there all the time. She would pop in and out, but she was, managing the Indian side of the production. She had a couple of young kids, and she didn't want to be involved in operations. So I was kind of basically responsible for sales and marketing and the fulfillment of the products and managing, the kind of the other employees that we had there. All of that was there. So a great kind of learning experience for me, although a relatively small operation, but to really run a business.
Yeah.
I wound up then, when I kind of started to max out, I started to look for the next thing, wound up going to work for a marketing communications firm in Chicago that served nonprofits and educational institutions. Right. And this was a bit of a sea change for me. Again, there was the mission in that the market it was serving was nonprofits, but it was a consulting firm. And
just one question there. So as you're path, as you are pathing the entire professional journey, are there no personal, or are there any personal experiences that stood out for you during this this phase? I think now you are in
Yeah,
mid
yeah, kind of.
20s or late 20s already.
Yeah. I think that I kind of glossed over that following the professional track, but around the time that I was working with Marketplace, this social enterprise,
Yeah.
I'd actually met my wife, who was working as the social worker in the same organization in India. So
Okay.
the Indian half of it was, again, working with disadvantaged women and people with handicaps. So
Yeah.
she was a social worker in Bombay, and I'd come to visit,
Yeah.
and she'd been kind of my guide and my interpreter.
Right.
And
Right. Yeah.
so we, yeah, so we
Okay.
got to know each other. And so in those days, I think it was just pre-email and everything.
Yeah.
Uh, we wound up writing letters to each other for about a year or so,
Yeah.
and decided to get married. And then she, had a really hard time, I think, getting a visa. I was not a U.S. citizen,
Mm.
so I had a green card. Um, but she couldn't get a visa to come. I think she was turned down about 5 times or something like that.
Oh.
Well, so I wound up getting my citizenship. That made it possible to bring her over. And I think about the time then I had moved over to this organization, this consulting firm, and
Mm.
she joined me in Chicago as well. And I stayed at I think the consulting firm, again, something like around 5 years.
Yeah.
And it was a great learning experience. It was a different zone. Mainly what I was doing was a lot of writing, and which was in line with some of the things I'd like to do, but also some of the marketing for this business. Uh, Probably over some time, after 3 years, I'd kind of mastered what they were doing quite well.
So
And
they were
started
supporting other organizations in their marketing communications.
exactly, yeah.
Okay. And
And
any kind of organization, for profit,
well,
not for profit, or
no, nonprofits and educational institutions.
always. Okay.
So
Okay.
for me, the thread was my
Yeah.
connection,
Yeah.
to kind of the nonprofit social sector, which is what I had decided I wanted to focus on. But
Sure.
this was going from a nonprofit itself to actually flipping it over to working with nonprofits as a
Yeah.
consultant,
Yeah.
you know. But I think it was a pretty, like maybe many consulting firms, this was a somewhat kind of dysfunctional place from a leadership perspective.
Mm.
There was a founder again that ran the show, very short-tempered,
Mm.
treat people really badly. They were doing good work,
Mm.
considered top in the country for what they were doing. That
Yeah.
kind of environment that was really frustrating, a lot of turnover,
Yeah.
as well. And so when my wife and I had come over, my mom had moved to South Carolina, and to North Carolina at the time. Um, and she'd gotten her job with some people that she worked with in South Carolina. She was working in the medical field as an administrator.
Yeah.
And so she had an opportunity to open up a new clinic in Winston-Salem, where I live,
Mm.
and to come to visit. And my wife really liked it here, because compared to Chicago, it was green. We'd
Mm.
always had a couple of break-ins into our car, our home, in
Mm.
the sense of kind of the crime that was there, and thinking about raising a family. So we said we would, look for jobs in North Carolina.
Mm.
And my wife actually found a job here with a school for special needs children. So in Chicago, she had been working at a domestic violence shelter,
Yeah.
which again was in line with her profession, but it was a very difficult job. I mean, you were always on call. You're dealing with a lot of very difficult situations. And coming from India, I think she had found that in India, the women were just so grateful for just about any opportunity that they might have to get
Mm.
ahead. But here in America, there was a sense of entitlement. She felt like you were constantly having to push people to
Mm.
say, find yourself an apartment, find yourself a job, try to create your life. And they were like, no, we're not ready,
Mm.
And I found that was kind of a little bit frustrating, and compared to where she had been. So in many ways, I think we moved to North Carolina. And I told my company I was leaving, and they said, well, why don't you continue working for us remotely, telecommute? And so that worked out well for me because my wife had found the job, I didn't.
Yeah.
And coming to North Carolina, both my wife and my mother said, you really ought to do an MBA because, I think you have a lot of potential, but I think this will help you get to the next stage. Again, I was not so keen on doing it. An MBA felt to me like something that was all about kind of business, and I was really interested in working in the social sector. But, I said I'd explore it. So I went to look at 3 programs in North Carolina and sat in, you could audit a class and have an experience of what was that like. In Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I was really impressed by the class that I sat in, the kind of dialogue that was happening. And I decided to go there. It was, again, one of those turning points, again, gave me a lot of exposure to business and case studies, and turned me on to leadership and innovation, because if I'd been working in the zone of creativity in the social sector, I'd really seen it from the lens of, well, you get money from here, you do good over there. It was like a charitable perspective. And I found in leadership another way to think about unlocking potential of people and innovation. Although the company I've worked with, had been a very innovative enterprise, I'd not seen it in that way. I suddenly had a lens to think about these things. And while deciding that, I wanted to turn my career in those directions. Soon after, when I was nearing graduation, there was a job actually at the Center for Creative Leadership and heading up the institutional relations function, which is around running the marketing PR function of the organization. It was very much in line with the background that I had. I come from a consulting firm that actually worked with such organizations doing marketing communications for them. It was really well positioned, got the job here at CCL, but I really wanted to move into the zone of innovation. Do something more meaningful rather than do what I had been doing before.
So which year is this, Lyndon? When did you join CCL?
This would have been 2002, the end of the year. Yeah. Kind of remember it was, 2002, 2000.
Doesn't matter, but you actually did like a full-time MBA, or were you working for this marketing comm and studying?
Yeah, I was actually marketing and working telecommuting for the firm. Which I'd find the MBA was the weekend program. I was able to juggle that quite well.
Right.
And again, as time went on, towards the end of my degree, I was also downsized from the Chicago firm. We had decided it would be a transition because I was telecommuting. And I think they decided that they could fill the role there, got somebody to do it. And it was just pretty close to the time I was going to graduate, and then I joined the center. And I think here after I joined in, I kind of wanted to focus on innovation. So when there was a new vice president who's actually the head of our European operation, David Altman, he had just come in to head up the research function. And he'd been brought in part with a mandate to help CCL become more innovative, because we'd had our greatest hits. We've done a lot of things, but effectively, but we were stuck in a bit of a rut. We were just doing more of the same. And, I connected with him. There was a lot of resonance around the ideas. And so I've changed my role to start up something called the Innovation Incubator. And, out of that, we started to explore possibilities that were different for CCL. And one of the things that came about was the Leadership Beyond Boundaries effort. And, after some of the early days there, but doing some of the exploration, it made it seem like, well, how do you take this forward? And so I really switched my energies from focusing on the broader construct of innovation at CCL to driving this Leadership Beyond Boundaries effort forward. And for me, that was, I think, the most significant work that I've done in my life. It brought everything together, in terms of, again, social mission. There's an opportunity to make a difference in developing countries, thinking about my background growing up in India. So even if in the past I've been working in the social sector, apart from the marketplace job, it was more focused on the American context and the opportunity to really make a difference for the developing world was significant, but also using the lever of leadership to empower people and using innovation practices to really figure out how do you build a new model and scale it out.
And you were the creator, one of the creators of that initiative?
Yeah, so I was at the beginning. There was a team that was exploring this effort. But once, the concept was framed, and it wasn't the same concept as Leadership Beyond Boundaries, but it was about how do you reach more people in the world. But we didn't know how to do that. It was a little bit more of an intention. But there it kind of sat, and there was a team that actually worked with IDEO and Continuum to design thinking firms to kind of take it a little bit further and frame a little bit about, a theory of change, how we could do this. So there's an opportunity at that point for somebody to say, how are you going to make this real? Because the consulting firms give you an idea, a concept, not even a roadmap, but more of a vision of possibility. But you need to bring it to life. So I really, at that point, I stepped up and was leading the effort. There's nobody else who was there to do it. And
the idea of leading beyond boundaries was to offer leadership skills to the underprivileged?
Yeah, so that was how we framed it, but it was also thinking about that CCL as a nonprofit organization had a social mission, which was to advance leadership for the benefit of society worldwide. But by and large, we were really working with senior level leaders at Fortune 500 companies, in Western economies, which is a very, very small fraction of all the people in the world. So there was always a certain kind of tension within CCL where people felt that we aren't living as fully up to our mission. And the organization itself had been founded by some of the people who'd come out of the Peace Corps. And there was always this undercurrent of we need to use leadership to make this a better world. But apart from working with senior level leaders and doing, some pro bono programs, the center hasn't really realized that in a significant way. So I think when we got this effort, there was this opportunity, but largely there was no resources from the center to do it. The center couldn't figure out how in the world could we make this happen. I remember a CEO of CCL, a previous CEO, said the only way I can think about how this might happen is literally for somebody to put $1 in a vending machine and get out a card or something like that. He couldn't think about how could people in India live on $1 a day? How are you going to reach those people with leadership development anyway? It's affordable. CCL running programs that cost $1,000 a day per person, right? Standard open enrollment program. It seemed beyond comprehension for people. A sense of, well, what do we know about Africa at all? What do we know about developing young people? These aren't spaces that we have any experience in. So I think it was a journey really to challenge those assumptions, but we use this process of design thinking to kind of really embed ourselves in these environments and start to understand the context of opportunity and need, and then start to prototype some of these processes that were there. That was what I really did for about the next 10 years at TCL. And I think LBB had grown to, doing a significant amount of work, but there was a hub in Africa where we had some people on the ground, as many as 20 people. There's a hub in the United States that had grown to about 15 people at the time, working mainly in education. But we chose and identified all these spaces that the center didn't have a presence in. So we weren't competing with the organization or trying to disrupt the organization. We're trying to extend it into new spaces, but doing it in a more disruptive way, in that we were creating these highly low-cost solutions that could fit the marketplace. So things that I'd learned in business school, like fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, and the innovator's dilemma, all those things were things that I started to put to use there. Definitely the paradigm of design thinking. But again, once again, I felt that 10 years, we'd kind of got where things were in a steady state, and it was now becoming more of a business. That was more about replication, client services. And there was a guy who had been hired who had taken on the innovation role at CCL. When I had got and focus on leadership and boundaries full time. And so he left, and so it was a chance for me to think, well, maybe I could step back in those shoes and figure out if I could use what I'd learned in LBB now back the wider organization. I stepped into that role, and I
That
think
was 3 years back, Lyndon?
This would have been about 2 years ago.
2 years back, okay.
Yeah, I think roughly, about 2 years. Not too long. And I think at the beginning, I think with an organization like ourselves, it was both challenging. Well, LBB, we had some freedom to go ahead and do what we were doing, but we had to find our own resources. This was, well, if you will, addressing the mothership, and I encountered, all the resistance that's there for bringing about change and doing things differently. But I think the organization had also come around to feeling that innovation was really important again. I think it's a thread that we hadn't done so much, but I think with revenue starting to flatten out, the rise of competition, globalization, technology, all of that was driving us to say, well, innovation is really important. So I had a bit of a run to start to frame an innovation strategy for the organization. And this is something that, if you will, I think we tried to do, and it's been a very mixed bag, I think, for me there, to try to, if you will, help the organization think about what was happening and how it needed to work differently. And this is part for the course with all successful organizations that need to change the big barriers around culture and mindset, and kind of trying to do things that are different from your past, right? That's cool.
What are the sort of things of your innovation, what were the sort of pillars of the innovation strategy that you were trying to introduce?
I think fundamentally what I had started to focus on and become keenly aware of is that there was a lot of technological disruption, digital disruption that was starting to emerge. And there was also a way for us to meet the needs of what we were about, which is building self-awareness, increasing the impact of individuals, helping organizations see the effectiveness. All these things, I think, were under challenge, in the environment. So if the center had done anything that was revolutionary, it had now been copied widely in the industry, whether it's 360-degree feedback, or coaching, or even leadership programs. These were now the norm, and yet I think there were ways to do this that were now possible with technology, thinking about things like augmented intelligence and wearable technologies and big data and augmented intelligence. All of this was starting to come together in a way that I could see that we could be doing things in a dramatically different way for the future. There was a sea change from our core business, which is really around doing face-to-face training. And so I think we, in the last this is again this year itself, but we went to a board of directors with a pitch for, making an ask for taking money out of our endowment to invest in creating this future. I think it met with mixed results. They saw it, but didn't see the urgency, and they said, well, use operating cash for this. I don't know, for me, it's a bit of a mystery, but at that point, I guess our CEO, who's now, I think, declared that he's around for maybe a year or more, I think started to make a bunch of changes with reorganizing the institution. One of the changes, this is just a couple of months old now, is reorged my function and a function that was focused on product development that was a separate group, and put us under a common umbrella, and also put in charge somebody who had been responsible more for planning. And so again, the innovation lens somehow felt very compromised. It was very much about results, short-term results, and here now, less about the big vision stuff that we've been pursuing. So that brings me pretty much to where I am now. I think I just came back from a trip to Silicon Valley, and once again encountered what's going on over there. This time I went to visit some of the leading think tanks, about the future. So I went to the Institute for the Future,
Yeah.
went to Singularity University.
Wow.
A colleague went to Deloitte Center for the Edge with John Seeley Brown. And so all these conversations are talking about not only the disruption that we saw, which was the focus of some of the previous conversations I'd had on previous visits, but this time it was really around the fact that organizations themselves need to be transformed for the future, that the old mode of these hierarchical institutions needed to morph to things that were really networks, that were really agile and empowered. And many of these folks said, it's not necessarily the opportunity that's the barrier, those are there, it's the organization itself, the internal construct.
So you are actually living through that, right? You're living
Yes,
through actually
absolutely.
a hierarchical organization, and with a planning head, and those sort of competencies, you're living through that. I don't know, absolutely. Is it a quarterly, return on investment kind of conversations?
Absolutely,
and at the same time, how are you balancing? And the other thing I wanted to, and I don't know, I know you said you need to drive at 8, and it's probably around 8. I'm very curious, and I'm reminded of the presentation you sent me, which was the the presentation and I'm very curious around what started you off on more your spiritual path, and also really how are you balancing these two things? On one hand, you're living one reality, so your lived experiences through you can see all the shackles of the hierarchical organization. And at the same time, looking at, if you need to innovate and if you need to bring something to those organizations, I guess you're looking back at the Fortune 500 or, I don't know if it is NGO focus, that they need to be morphed into network organizations, etc. So I'm very curious how you're balancing those two realities.
Yeah. I think that partly some of this kind of awakening came to me partly through the kind of frustrations that I was feeling around the work, right? And I think in a way that I had, needed to make a shift, which was around feeling like, other people kind of, if you will, needed to change, the environment needed to change. This is recognizing that I myself needed to change, And actually the Leadership Beyond Boundaries work that I had done, I had fallen into some of this thinking and had connected with a visiting fellow that we had, a person by the name of Prasad Kaipa, who wrote a book called From Smart to Wise, and had set up the leadership effort at the Indian School of Business, and had worked with Apple in the early days, and had now emerged as kind of a coach to CEOs. But he and I really connected, and one of the things we created was this framework based on the 7 chakras, that mapped it to leadership stages. And for me, this really captured a lot of, what was behind CCL, but from an Eastern frame of reference. We were trying to move people from dependence to interdependence, the higher order, that vertical development stage, although that term was not something that we were using at that point. Also in Leadership Beyond Boundaries, we had this theory of change that extended from lead self to lead with others to change your world. Recognizing that a leader needs to operate from place of purpose in that zone of identity that's built into the programs that we do. But then it's about kind of the interpersonal skills of being able to work effectively with others. Fundamentally, the promise of leadership is to create change, in the wider world and organizations, but also within ourselves. So we say change your world, because your world could be yourself, could be your family, could be your community, could be your organization. So I think it all of this really came together in that framework. But the thing, as I put it out in CCL, people found it interesting, but I think they found that Eastern frame, quasi-spiritual, deeply, deeply challenging. They couldn't relate to it as much, So, but nonetheless, everything that I had arrived at seemed to collapse around and integrate around this frame of and being more deeply connected to oneself. So and is a word that connects, right? This and that. And it can be things that belong together, and things that also don't belong together. You can connect the opposites with and, this and that. But I think so it was about this notion of connection. and being connected to oneself, being connected to others, being connected to the world, and ultimately to that zone of oneness, that very much Indian idea that we are part of a universal creation. The divine is part of everything. Everything is connected to each other as part of this great scheme.
So is that more transcendental then?
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, but I do not have enough exposure to.
Yeah.
I love to read your seven chakras, the Eastern frame.
Yeah, at one level, I mean, this is connected. When I framed this together, I found out that I hadn't read him before, but it was kind of almost identical to what Ken Wilber had done.
Wilber, yeah, I was about to say. I mean, so it was okay.
Yeah. But I hadn't really arrived at it that way. I'd actually worked with Prasad Kuiper, who had kind of, I think his focus had been, again, taking Indian wisdom and reframing it for like a Western context. So if you look him up, you'll see a lot of that kind of stuff that he's done. And so nonetheless, I felt kind of that I'd started on this book project, and it was weaving together both and being, again, innovation about being able to connect things that don't go together, right? Create some new leadership about being able to connect people together. We use DAC, but to mobilize people in service of a common mission.
Yeah.
So it was part of what leadership was about. It was about social change again, which is to connect the old order with the new and bring them together. So in all these cases, it is about seeking those connections, that interdependence that's there, and this notion of integrative thinking, which came out of design thinking as a concept to say that on the surface, things don't seem to go together. But if you get to the essence of things, you find connection points that you can build on and express in ways. And certainly the spiritual kind of aspect of being connected to the wider world, being connected to oneself. So I started to read fairly extensively in kind of spiritual texts from different traditions. And again, found these common connections at the essence level that was there.
Yeah.
So this became kind of the basis of what I started to think. And I started to, over the last few years, 5 years, I've written a number of pieces, but they're journal articles, book chapters, but they're all pieces of this puzzle. So even if I haven't gotten to write the book itself, I've written about a dozen, 15 pieces that are little chunks of the book, and started to be able to advance my thinking. More recently, though, again, in the past few months, I've been encouraged to, take that concept and put it out into the world, even if I didn't have kind of a CCL lens on it exactly. And I did this at a polarity conference, which is polarity management. And it went over really well. And more recently, I kind
Your
of did
AND presentation was also at the polarity conference, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Your AND presentation was also at the polarity conference.
Yeah, so that's the one I did there. That was really well received, with a group of kind of both academics and practitioners.
Yeah.
And so that was an encouragement too. And then recently I've done a couple of keynote addresses using it, and it's also been well received. So I'm really encouraged to put it out. I think it is, an integrating perspective that is very much needed in the world that is deeply polarized, right? You asked me about the US elections.
I know. I was thinking, oh my God.
Yeah, you could think about the state of the world in Europe as well and what's going on.
Brexit, I mean, my friends in the UK now, for them, anything can happen,
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel in the US, but the latest media is saying after the latest thing on Hillary, now they are closer to each other. Otherwise, there was a larger gap.
Yeah.
Imagine having Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't know yet. Yeah. But also between kind of the East and West, between Islamic world now and the West, and again, that great divide that's there. And we tend to look at things in black and white terms, good and bad. But actually, from this holistic oneness perspective, it's not so, right? It's yin and yang, the both of the whole. And there's a need to find the harmony between those things. So I think there is a lot that resonates with what I think, even when I go to Silicon Valley and the conversations that I've had. They say, well, in order for organizations to deal with disruption, you have to tune into your purpose. What's your core? And really the contribution you make is not necessarily the products or services you have, it's kind of the stance you take in the world. What do you stand for? Because the manifestation of that might need to change as the environment changes. But what drives you forward is a certain kind of core purpose. I'm really struck by, I think, also in the journey that many companies, businesses are really thinking about what they do in terms of advancing the social good. There is a convergence there. So every company wants to think about, that we're making a positive difference in the world through our products and services, no matter what they are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Either enhancing the quality of life of people, reducing the amount of pain that they have, enhancing their ability to be more effective, whatever it is. And I think it suggests that a deeper sense that people have now in this current age of seeking meaning of purpose, that their lives matter. We all kind of want that, and companies are responding, I think, to that need, because employees are largely free agents, right?
Yeah.
The balance of loyalty has shifted, that you don't work with the company for life anymore. And people also are looking for opportunity and mobility, this millennial generation, right?
Yeah.
So I think this notion of purpose has become very, very central there. So it's been good to see in many, many zones they work in the social sector, in the corporate sector, and this larger environmental context, all these forces. I think there is something to be said around these notions. So this is really, in a way, a certain kind of the end concept, is summation of everything I've done, everything I've learned, that yet remains to be articulated. It's been articulated in some form, but I think that is one of the things that I feel that would be a contribution that I could make to the future.
Sure. Thank you, Lyndon. That is that is amazing. I'm so glad I'm recording this, because I'm furiously writing notes, but I think I'm capturing like some of the keywords, and it's so good that I will have that transcribed and reflect back on the number of things that you've said. And it's a fascinating journey. There were two things that came to my mind, because you mentioned a couple of times your mom, but you never mentioned your dad. So your dad is still back in India. I know you.
So he passed on about 5 years ago.
Okay.
So my parents had gotten divorced, and and he stayed on in India. She came to the United States, and so he was kind of an alcoholic, and I think he again wound up, when my parents separated, falling into really bad times. So I used to go over to India to try to figure out what I could do for him, wound up paying most of his bills. But I think in those last 10 years of life, he kind of wound up with a stroke and became largely housebound, but made his peace with his life and his environment, but suffered a lot of illness that was there. So I think one of the things that I did was kind of take responsibility for his care. And at the time, I also questioned whether I needed to come back to India to look after him. But I think he said something to me that, well, I've had my life, it's important that you have yours. I don't wish for you to basically ruin your life to come take care of me, I really appreciated that, because as Indians, we have, that sense of obligation that we are responsible for.
As we speak, right? My father is very unwell, and he's. I'm just fortunate that they live with my brother, but otherwise, I think that becomes such a huge responsibility. As soon as aging parents, and especially if there is a long-term illness, so that I can understand fully. Well, the other thing I'm thinking is, what's your support network as you go through all of this? And we can cover that the next time. I mean, has it really been books and knowledge? Or are you, have you had a coach? Have you had a therapist? How have you, because you've mentioned to me that, I never got really a lot of guidance from my parents. And I know that that sort of thing can do all sorts of things to people. So, and you seem yet so stable and collected, and since the time I met you, you seemed like that to me. So very arrived, if I can use the word. So that's why I feel, how is that? Because you sort of said that, I never got guidance from them. And as somebody who got a lot of guidance from her parents, that's such a big deal for me. So
I can talk more about that next time.
Sure.
So yeah, I need to kind of move so I can get to work for a meeting at the office.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
but yeah, and I think, so I also, in telling you what's happened, I feel like I've also been, and you've been probing in certain places, but been dealing with it with a very superficial way, the upper level narrative of what happened.
It is the upper level narrative, which is usually what happens in the first conversation. So I think,
but not like the emotional context or the learnings that are there.
Yes.
Considered some of those things, but not really unpack them. So I think there's a lot more. I don't know. Hopefully this is being helpful to you.
Definitely, it gives me like a broad brush, right? A very broad brush. What I'm looking for, of course, are those nuggets and those those things that are meaningful to you, and hence what resonate also with me. And you're right, at the moment it's a really broad brush. You focused a lot on your professional career and professional steps.
That's right.
To the extent that I had to ask you what was happening with your personal life at the same time.
Yeah, I can talk more of that, but that's also telling, right? Sometimes.
It is. And I think that's perfectly, I think it's great. It gives a frame, and then we can dig a bit deeper.
Yeah, but they can tell you more about that side of it.
Yeah.
So I think you've set up, have you, another time for us to talk?
No, not yet. I think you said the last week of November, did you?
Yeah. I think that's the week I'll be around, and then that week, and the first week of December, then I'm off to India.
Yeah, so I will send you again what I did this time. I'll send you a couple of options in the last week of November and first week of December. And then if possible, and I don't know how the dates, etc. coincide, I'll see if I can meet you in person in India.
It turns out like, we can try, and, I might need an open slot of time that I have in India. I've been asked to come over to China, and so I might not be much available in India.
Much available.
But I'll be in Bombay, and I'll be in Goa for some of the time. So we can certainly see if we can have some overlap depending on where you'll be.
Yeah, because even I'm in Mumbai and Goa, but also I'm in Sri Lanka and Coimbatore. So between the places, I think if you send me your dates of when you're in Mumbai and when you're in Goa, I'll see if there is a thing that coincides. Yeah.
Sounds good, Shivangi. So I should go. And
thank you so much, Lyndon. It's been great as our first conversation. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.
Take care. Have a good day. Bye.